So in that video, we could see you talking to two different voices. And it started out with you talking to one voice, and then another voice came in. So what was going on for you when you were talking to that one voice initially?
I just felt like, for a part of my life, that's what it was like. All those messages, don't go out, don't trust anybody, don't, you're gonna get hurt. And it made for a very small, depressing life. And I was unsure, what to do with it. I really just wanted it to stop. I couldn't block it out. As I said, it was making my life very small and a feeling of desperation within me. If this is what life is, this is not what I want to be. I don't want to be in this life. And so one time when I was having that kind of a desperation, I actually thought maybe I could look for a different message,
Mm.
and to kind of evaluate where have I gotten messages that felt empowering. Also, when I started training, I learned from HPN pioneers from the UK. They had this term protective voice, and I'm like, what are you talking about? That does not feel like a protecting voice. That's making my life small and miserable. But I had never considered what the goal of the voice was. And when we were talking, you took it another level that that might actually be somebody's idea of love, or out of love, or out of fear. Um, and that was like a whole shift for me too, to think, okay, maybe they don't, maybe their goal isn't to shrink me. Maybe it really is about protecting me, that it's coming across awfully to me, but it's based on a fear which may be in relationship to me or maybe in relationship to themselves, but it really changes the dynamic that a scary voice is actually a terrified voice.
It's amazing how in this video, and I think also in some of the clips that have been posted in the past and the other real play video, there's this correlation between the messages you're getting from the voice and the messages you're getting from people in your life historically or present, and how sometimes those kind of blend together. And in some ways, I think, oh, of course, because I've been in these spaces and we know that there's a relationship between those things that often they build off of each other, or one starts and the other. Sometimes you don't even know which one starts first. But I think I'm sort of like it's kind of sinking in more and seeing this one where you're like, yeah, the voice is saying this to me and also people in my life. And it's sometimes I'm like, oh, which one are we talking about? But it seems like the healing process is quite similar for you.
Right, and within the hearing voices approach, there's this premise that no matter what is happening for somebody, somehow it makes sense in the context of their life. Um, and so, yeah, it makes sense that what's going on in somebody's life is going to impact their voice hearing experience. Regardless of how you define those voices, whether you define them as whatever, inner critic or messages, spirituality or being haunted, however you define it, that somehow it is happening in relationship to life experiences. And I do think that sometimes it's not necessarily an actual live human being with a body who gave me that message. Sometimes it's a message is more about how I'm interpreting the world, or a societal message, which,
Mhm.
like right now in the US, is just so tough. Like who belongs, who doesn't, who's good enough, who's valid, who isn't. I think some of that stuff, either haunts people or it gets internalized. But depending on who you are, walking down a certain street, it makes total sense for, to have either internal or external voice saying you don't belong here, right? And where, who knows? I'm definitely not here to tell anybody else their experience, but I can say what I've seen, and yeah, it can be um, interesting to see the crossover between
Mhm.
what messages somebody's getting in the world and what messages they're getting from voices.
I appreciate that more loose definition of messages where it's not just, okay, from a voice or from a person in the past, but also just from systems and society. And I definitely relate to that. And it can be difficult, particularly in mental health contexts where people aren't always curious, what messages are you getting from society or from your community at large, right? Let alone from other people. But I know I've been really grateful in hearing voices spaces and in other spaces like alternatives to suicide, where people are saying, of course, messages from society and how you're treated in society impacts your experiences, whether it's your feelings or the voices you hear or whatever it is. So that feels extremely important in these times, especially when folks are figuring out how to support other people and being like, let's not forget that there's messages that we're all getting all the time, even if no one is saying those specific words to us, right? I didn't have a lot of people saying really racist things to me growing up, but there were smaller things that then led me to making conclusions that were more extreme. I think that's true for a lot of people.
When I was 5 years old, on a very teeny black and white TV, I got to see fire hoses and police dogs put upon children for trying to march. And as a little kid, that absolutely shaped my view of the world. Here are black children being treated this way, and so in my, so that's not something somebody said to me. It's not something somebody did to me. But as a little kid, it was you know, an image, right? And it was real, and it was a fact of living in the U.S. at that time. That was happening, uh, and so yeah, so that's like this brief moment in my life, but it shaped how I saw the world. Or my sense of, is this a safe world to be in or an unsafe world? Uh, and it's interesting too, so you can say, oh, that's a problem within me, but it's in a context of a larger society. And so someone's talking to you and they're having distress or struggling with a voice, there's a whole context. And like you said, a lot of times in mental health, they're looking for what's wrong in the person versus saying, hey, there's a reason this is happening. It's happening in a context. I'm curious about that context. What has this person been through? What have they seen? How do they interpret it? And so me as a kid, I interpreted it, the police are not there to protect children. That's the way my little kid brain, you know, where somebody with other experiences say you do call the police, but that's just not in my, not just in that experience, but in my experience growing up, that just wasn't it. It was like, you don't do that because someone's gonna get hurt. And so this, I think what gets hard is sometimes people turn this into a right or wrong thing, where it's a different experience thing, and both can be true and valid. You know, f- you know, and so if we spent more time trying to understand than to diagnose or assess or put people in boxes, we might find out we have more in common.
Mhm.
And yeah, sorry, I just brought up emotions. I mean, because I have been thinking about that a lot now, because it's really. what's going on now is, reminding me of that. And that doesn't make me, it doesn't make me eligible, it shouldn't make me eligible for a diagnosis. It should be like, oh, that makes sense. If this is the context, that makes sense. And how do we figure out support me to navigate the world the way it is now, currently? You know, a little bit deeper is frequently for people, something's happening in the present and it is bringing up maybe an unconscious level or maybe a physical level, a memory of the past. Like I see this a lot around fear. Somebody will walk into a room and have fear, and somebody might say, "Oh, there's nothing to be afraid of," but that doesn't remove the fear from somebody's body. But if you can figure out where that fear is coming from, what in this present is reminding me of the past, or in HPN we might say, have you felt that way before? Or when's the first time you've had that feeling? And then if I can understand where the fear is coming from, I can talk back to it and say, hey, this reminds me of, but this is not the same. Plus, I'm not the same. I'm not a little kid now, right? I can make a choice to walk away from the ice building when I look up and see the guy with the long rifle pointing it at us. I can say, oh, I think we need to walk away now, right? I'm not a little kid, trying to cross a bridge. And so that's what I would like to see. I would like to see people be curious and understand there's a reason somebody's hearing a voice like that, or a reason they're having this huge fear that's coming from somewhere. And let's explore it versus telling them to ignore it, deny it, distract it, doesn't matter, isn't real, right? That really, if they could do that, if I could have done that, I would have done that. That practice just was not helpful.
Yeah. Also, part of that for me when I'm in a support role connects to just being okay with not knowing and how scary that can be when a loved one is really struggling. And I just have to be like, this is happening for a reason, and I don't know what that is right now. That can be so hard.
And yeah, and I'm trying to understand it. Sometimes I don't. I don't. Right? And I have to accept that. But what's more important than me understanding them is for the person to have their own understanding. Right? Sometimes I used to think in therapy it was all about the therapist getting me to disclose or the therapist to figure me out. No. What it's about is me figuring me out. And how do I navigate, right? And sometimes even when somebody else figures it out and they tell you, it's going to take you longer to get there for yourself. Because now it's like, don't tell me my experience. I didn't come here for you to tell me my experience. Unless somebody's asking for that, it can actually make things worse. And I'm thinking about, so what do you do? Oh, I don't know why Sasha has that fear. And I don't understand that fear, or I don't get it. But if I'm listening, Sasha, does it help? If I'm asking you questions that you answer or don't answer, does that have an impact on you?
For me, the biggest part is knowing, like, is for you to be okay with what I'm going through feels so huge or has felt so huge for me in the past. Like before, like, yeah, I remember being in a lot of fear and having experiences I didn't understand and feeling like followed and trying to understand, like, am I being tested? But the thing I needed first was just to be able to talk about it and to know that people wouldn't be afraid of me having my experience. And then it felt like, okay, well, it's going to be okay. And yeah, I would like to understand, right? But it felt like that's like another layer. Um, to just
Right.
being like accepted.
And that's another point that, even if a therapist or somebody else can figure out what it is I'm going through and why, if I don't trust them, if I don't feel seen, heard, or validated or cared for, it really isn't that helpful. If I feel, that whole being seen, heard, and validated is one of the ways that people heal from trauma, which is kind of the opposite of being told you're ill, you're delusional, but to somebody say, hey, I don't know how this makes sense, but I know it makes sense given the context of your life, is a really different message.
Totally.
For me, I used to say, I'm going to say the wrong thing and the person will throw me away. Either they'll quit talking to me or they'll call 911. And so to be stuck in it alone was way more difficult. So yeah, somebody just listens or somehow feels connected. If I felt connected to somebody in some way, and almost made me feel like, well, I'm not going to fall off the earth or I'm not going to disappear. Or there's one place where it's okay to be me, my genuine self, or to be honest. Yeah, so we don't have to understand. Uh, I'm trying to understand. I don't always understand, but I can be present. And I can ask the other person what would feel supportive. And I can remember telling somebody, oh, I know you and your husband drive around sightseeing on the weekends. Just put me in the back seat. Don't even talk to me. But I don't want to be alone. You know, and so it's kind of funny. Sometimes you can just ask somebody. Sometimes I know, sometimes they don't. Sometimes I ask people questions and I'm like, I don't need the answer. Like it's none of my business. Like it's just a question for you to think about. And lots of times people would ask me questions and I wouldn't answer them because either I didn't know the answer or I didn't want to share or didn't feel safe to share there. But they were great questions and they're really helpful. It got me thinking differently. So like just in that video, the Sasha voice said, the thing about love, and I was having a bad reaction to it, and that was good. And you unpacked it, and as you were unpacking it, um, it changed my perspective. That's the other thing. Sometimes people are like, I have to get it right, or I have to do this or that, or I have
Mm-hmm.
to make the person feel a different way. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, so it's not like shoot them all down and totally agree with the person on everything. Like there's this other place of just being genuine as well. And that's okay that people have different experiences and perspectives. One doesn't have to rule the other one out. It got really heavy really quick, Sasha. I have to say that. Keeping
These are
it
heavy
real.
times.
Keeping it real.
I want to go back real quick to something no less heavy, but there was a thread that I just wanted to pick up on where you were talking about watching that footage on TV and being impacted and making conclusions about the world. And I just wanted to highlight that we're talking about, okay, like maybe when you're trying to figure out what's going on, right? It's like maybe I've heard this from a person, maybe I've heard this from society towards myself, but also maybe I've heard it towards other people. And that's been a part of my experience too. And when I've had some fears, sometimes people aren't even mistreating me, but I've seen how people have been mistreated or excluded. And then that impacts me personally and how I feel in the world. And that's important because I think that you were talking about, instead of the individual, instead of being in the mental health system and sometimes being told, okay, what is your problem individually? I might be suffering, I might be feeling hard things, I might be struggling with things that I've not even necessarily personally experienced, but that are a big part of my experience in the world now. And I think that that is often a missing piece. And you see that in conversation now with people being like, okay, who's at risk, right? With what's happening with ICE and with immigration, and people going, okay, are you at risk? Like, are you at risk? When should I be concerned? Like, when should I do something? When do I have the right to be impacted? And people on social media watching other people be harmed and going, well, maybe I'm not afraid of this happening to me, but I still feel the pain. And so many times in groups and hearing voices, friends and family groups, people talk about their loved one being so sensitive, like very just like a sensitive, highly empathic person. Like, when people are like, oh, I have lots of kids, but this one is like really sensitive. And I think that that is often true, that people who have these kinds of experiences are often really attuned to like emotions that other people are going through, or are highly impacted by things that maybe don't impact other people as much. And I don't think that gets brought into the conversation enough.
I also think it gets really confusing um, and an unhelpful attempt to be informed because the trauma, what's important, this may sound weird, what, it's not the thing, it's how it impacted somebody. So depending on what I'm walking around in the world with, including my gifts, sensitivities, and uniqueness, things are going to impact me differently than somebody else. So, like, I have a sister who's 4 years older. There were things that happened to the both of us, but because of the age difference and other things, they impacted us differently. So, how does it impact you, right? That's not make the list of everything. No, how do these things impact you? That's the important conversation, right? And and that is still trauma, even if it didn't happen to you, and that had a traumatic impact on you. Yeah, I get, people are doing this first-hand, second-hand trauma. Oh my gosh, there are some things that happen where the witnesses are more impacted because the person that happened to is blacked out in the moment, right? Like they remember it deeper with more clarity than the person. Like for me, I was very good certain times at just blocking it all out, like just not even being in my body, not even being present for it, right? You don't think that impacted somebody witnessing that? Yeah, so I think we get into this not as useful conversation. Uh, the useful conversation is how did it impact you? How did it change your worldview? What emotions got trapped in your body? How did you make sense of it if you could make sense of it? Um, I think that's really important. And I don't think anybody has a right to say is what feelings or impacts you like should or could have. I mean, it's really, that's people can be impacted differently, and for a host of reasons. Like, you know, if I go through something difficult, and there are people who witnessed it or validated it or believed me, that is going to have a different impact on me than if none of those things happen, right? And so I think what for me is frustrating is sometimes people can't agree on facts, can watch the same video and see different things, um, or yeah, I think that's difficult, right? Like if we see an earthquake and we see the tragedy, there's no debate, right? But these things that are wrapped up in politics or media can get all these different narratives, and then I think that's a little crazy making. When the masked people with guns who are pulling people off the street are not being called the terrorists, but the mums in the minivans are. Like to me, like it's upside down. It's upside down. I don't get it.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely can contribute to internal confusion when if I'm already in a state of fear. And then I'm seeing so many versions of stories that benefit people differently. Um,
Right, or yeah, and so in that moment, how do I figure out who to trust, who to call, who's gonna tell me I'm upside down backwards? Instead of being curious about how or the why of how I'm seeing things, right?
mhm,
Or we had a previous conversation about what information you're provided with impacts how you might make a decision. And sometimes some people will use little piece or this little piece. And then it's like, well, no wonder people have different perspectives because they're working on
mm,
little pieces of information. And unfortunately, a lot of times they're not even curious about, oh, I wonder why they came to believe what they believe, which, like is a healing path for a relationship is to try to understand each other and share that.
yeah, to me, it's helpful for you to the reminder that like there have been times in my life when I've been in a fear state and I just want people to be able to check in with about it. Like it's not right. There have been times where I'm like very convinced of what I'm experiencing and I don't want your input on what you think on the conclusions I'm making. But there's definitely been times where I'm like, oh, this is getting a little weird. I would love to like check in with somebody and be like, do you see what I see? Or like, is this making sense to you? I'm not sure, but because I also have my own process with my own experiences, right? Like we all do. It's not just one or the other. Like I'm totally in or I'm totally in your world or my world. So yeah, so important to be able to talk to people about it or to have people who can hold space and not then be like, uh-oh, you're bad.
Yeah. Yeah, it's well you raised another thing, which is, I was doing a family consult and my mom said I'm so concerned that I'm not actually helping and tell me what I can do to help my loved one. And I said, well, let's ask him. Like, blew her mind. I'm like, because I don't know what the answer is. Like, I actually would like to ask him what would feel supportive in a moment or helpful. And it was really neat. And he's one of the things this person said, which, we like you brought up alternatives to suicide. I've seen that a lot where I don't have the band-aid, I don't have a magic wand, I don't have a solution. But somehow people, oh my gosh, somebody's finally listening. And that's kind of what this person said. Hey, yeah, could you not try to fix me? And could you try just listening? Uh, and I told her, she has a right to say what's coming up in her. She has to be a person in a relationship too. And she has a right to say, hey, this is really heavy. I think I need to take a deep breath, get a glass of water, or whatever. I said, if you model taking care of yourself, that would be good. Like, or model that you have emotions too. That would be good.